Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Deploy Friday, the live stream by Platform.sh, where we focus on everything that we're interested in the space of web development and hosting in a variety of languages. My name is Chad Carlson. I work for the DevRel team at Platform. And on this episode, we're going to focus on some of the stuff that's going on within our company, specifically a feature called source operations and how it relates to managing large fleets of websites. And I am very happy to be joined today with two of my coworkers. I have here Chris Yates, VP of Marketing. Hey, Chris.
Good.
And also with me, I have Augustin Delaporte, who has a new title of Director of Enterprise and Fleets. Hey, Augustin.
Hi, Chad. Hi, Chris.
That sounds fancy.
So maybe it's best we start with you, Augustin. We're talking about fleets in the title. What is a fleet?
Yeah, that's a good question. We can start with defining what's a fleet. Fleet is really, we talk about fleet ops a lot at Platform.sh. What we call a fleet is when you start managing multiple projects, multiple web applications. I think as soon as you start having more than one web application that you're managing, you're starting running a fleet. Basically, you're facing constraints, you're facing different problematics that you have to solve. How you maintain those web applications, how you upgrade those applications, how you implement new features to those applications. And that's why we like to call a fleet a group of projects that don't forcefully look the same or are built with the same technologies. They can be using different runtimes, different language, loading different services. But as soon as you start having multiple of them, we define that as a fleet, and you need to keep them secure. You need to keep them up to date, and that's basically what we are calling a fleet.
So all of these same concerns that you're going to have for a single web application, but as soon as you start adding more, you get that much more attention need to be placed to managing hundreds of these sites potentially, whether or not they share the same code base.
Exactly. But the key point here is that you don't need to have hundreds of applications to be managing a fleet. The problematics arrive very early in the process, as soon as you have, let's say, 5, 10, 20 applications that you're managing. And that number is reached very, very soon, very early in your process, because you have an internal company website, maybe an internal forum that you are managing. You have some APIs, some front end, some backends, some documentation sites. You very quickly realize that you're managing a lot of domains, and those applications are built with very different languages, using different frameworks. So very quickly you end up in a situation where you need to maintain those applications. You need to so you're in a fleet situation where you need to find solutions to keep everything up to date, everything all the time running, scaling, and everything that we're going to talk about today. So fleet is very something that I believe a lot of people are facing today without really realizing it.
Sure, because maybe people do think that it might necessitate having huge numbers of websites, but it doesn't need to. Do you see this becoming a more common challenge that people come up against? Like more agencies are dealing with way more numbers of sites, or even single companies are finding themselves where they are needing to have multiple pieces of documentation out there that they have to maintain. I don't know if either of you could speak to of how a company, a group having a fleet becoming a more common occurrence, or larger numbers of them today as opposed to maybe a few years ago.
Yeah, we definitely see a trend, especially at Platform.sh, because we support so many use cases. We host so many different websites using so many different runtimes or frameworks. We see that more and more. And basically what happens is that we have agencies or customers that start hosting their sites on Platform.sh. Maybe they start with their Drupal sites. So they're running an agency, or they have a couple of Drupal sites, and they say, okay, let's run all those Drupal sites on Platform.sh. And then they keep some snowflakes that they don't really realize that they are snowflakes, but they keep those sites, their forum, their internal agency site, that's using a completely different framework or runtime. Maybe it's Node.js, maybe it's Python, Go, whatever. And they don't consider that as part of their process to manage. And at some point, they realize that, hey, maybe we could standardize on what we have for our Drupal sites in a single platform. And then they start migrating those sites with us and realize, hey, this is actually super easy to manage all those sites and consider all those applications and maintain them the same way without thinking about the different snowflakes here and there that they also have to support with, which involve different teams, different developers. So I see that people are realizing that they are running fleets, as we call them, and that they could standardize on a single environment. So we see that more and more that people are migrating sites that they were not considering Platform.sh as a hosting solution before, because they can actually standardize with a mechanism like source operations or the whole Git integrated workflow that we propose.
Sure.
So yeah, it's actually increasing the number of people that are facing those constraints and limitations. We see that more and more.
Well, I think the proliferation of sites and applications across organizations of almost any size has really increased a lot as well over recent years. There was a Forrester research survey from a number of years ago. I think it was like 2014 or 2015. It said the average enterprise was running 268 websites. But if you look at universities or large brands or holding companies, say like a global consumer products company that has a whole portfolio of products, you think, well, I've got the main.com website for each of those products. But then what we don't necessarily realize as kind of consumers of those brands or people that are aware of those brands, they actually have people around the world to support all of those and sell them slightly differently with different messaging, different presentation, different mixture of products and all these things. So you might have like a single brand site, a single brand that has 40, 50, 60 different teams and sites and applications that they're supporting. And then with the proliferation of kind of campaign specific things, whether it's a mobile app backend or it's a website for a specific marketing campaign, something that's associated with a television ad or a standalone digital campaign or something like that, you just end up with more and more websites, and often kind of running in little silos all over organizations. Like I've actually heard, and actually I was in a university environment, so I know there were literally servers running under desks, like important stuff was running on a computer that sat under somebody's desk, and you just hope you don't trip over the power cord or have an outage in that particular building because there's something important back in there. So you end up with a relatively low cost or barrier to entry to create new things. But what we've found is that whether we're developers ourselves or kind of managing groups that are responsible for developing new things, is that the cost of developing things might be staying steady or going down, in fact, based on great tools that are coming out of the open source communities like Drupal and WordPress and Strapi and others. But the cost of maintaining all of that complexity and making sure everything is working right gets more and more burdensome and consumes more of people's time. So that's why we see more people trying to consider this fleets as a problem space to kind of reorganize how they approach their technology, their management, and their process, because I think we're moving away from this concept of or changing what it means to scale in organizations. So when we think about scaling, we often think about like how many simultaneous requests can I serve, or how many page views, how many users can I accommodate in my application or my site. But scale is really three-dimensional. It's about as you get more and more things to manage, that's one horizontal scale. That's a challenge that a lot of organizations and even individual developers that might be managing a small fleet of things for a customer or themselves. But then you have the kind of the notion of this third dimension of scale, which is people. So the more people, the more organizational structures you involve, the more complexity you get in terms of how you manage your kind of entire application or website fleet.
Sure. You got a lot more responsibility involved with scaling out in that way, both in oversight across a whole fleet of sites for whatever they end up being, departments, single products, but then also being able to kind of coordinate responsibility for those who are actually actively maintaining an individual site. So before we get into the source operation aspect of it, what is it about our API that kind of helps in this problem space, as opposed to some other things that you've seen or other tools that are out there, maybe specific to fleets of a particular framework?
Yeah, I can try to answer that question. That's again a good question. First, all the workflow that we are running basically is Git based. So if you want to update a specific code base on a project, you will have to use Git, and we map the infrastructure, basically the entire architecture of your application, including the services, the files, and everything within Git. So you define the different services with their version and their configuration, and you use Git to deploy and upgrade your site. When you start having a lot of projects, you need a mechanism to update them, let's say all at once, with the guarantee that what you're deploying can be tested and can be checked before it actually goes to production. And that's the entire idea of source operation, but we have the ability to do that because we are Git based. So every time we do an update using whatever mechanism we have in the background, there is a Git commit that's going to guarantee that the version has been updated to whatever number, that those dependencies have been updated, this security patch has been applied. So you can really track all the different changes that have happened to your application and test that everything is working the same before going to production. So our API, where you can very quickly spin up a new environment from a new commit, like every branch can have its own isolated environment where you can test things before going live, is the mechanism that allows us to, with a click on a button, update thousands of websites, code bases, and test them before they go to production. So that's really the key concept behind Platform.sh, to drive everything. The API is Git. Our API is Git, basically.
And then on top of that, you have the control to delegate access for individual projects from this kind of central hub across the fleet to say, this is the team that's going to work on an individual project and have no visibility to anything else, or they're only going to have visibility to updates running in the background, or to a design team that's working on the front end. Okay, let's get into.
Well, not only that, I mean, the other aspect of it is that, and the cool thing about Git is that you can absorb changes on certain levels into your project, but you can also create changes locally. And what I mean is, it maybe is better explained through an analogy of, like, if you consider the ways that you can approach managing a lot of things to make it really abstract. I've used a metaphor of three different kinds of roads or approaches. One is like, if you visualize it as a road, there's one approach that's very much kind of straight and narrow, top down. Everything kind of stays the same. So, you're on this kind of highway that goes off into the horizon, and so I've created a set of features, for instance, that, I've created centrally, and then I can push those down to, everything that exists in my organization from an application or website perspective. So this might be like, yeah, I can create, the core functionality that exists, in a content management system, or in a chat bot thing that I want to deploy everywhere in my organization. And there are tools that will let you basically push a button or do things in the background and push that exact same experience to everyone, every application, in every region or in every brand or whatever permutation, every record label or artist, whatever your particular bit is, department in a university. So that's kind of the straight and narrow. But the drawback of that is everything has to be the same. And in many cases, it means everything has to be the same all the time. Like there may be differences in important things going on out in those regions. Maybe you're having a big sale, maybe you're having a holiday, maybe you're having something else. Who knows? There are different reasons why you might want to stay out of sync. But it's that can be challenging because if you're kind of this top-down command and control sort of approach, you have that sort of approach, then one size has to fit all. So we see people do the opposite of that, which is to say, build it from scratch, build it from the ground up, whatever you need to do, whether it's on, let's go to AWS, because AWS has tools for just about everything, from, running a website to computer vision and whatever, and all sorts of other services that they have crazy names for. The challenge is that everything becomes this crazy fractal of complexity that where you're repeating costs and you're it's kind of like there's basically a dirt road. It's you have to build all the layers to make it passable and usable, and everyone is completely different. The third way is, I think, more akin to what we do at Platform.sh and what I think people in organizations ultimately need, which is flexibility on both ends. So it's the ability to have a lot of this kind of underlying infrastructure, both from as what we traditionally think of infrastructure. So we think about servers and containers and networks and databases and all that kind of stuff provided for you, but also the actual kind of surface and routes and traffic lights and all those other things that make things actually function. So you could think of that as kind of your application framework. So that could be, like a website CMS framework or digital experience framework, but it could also be the specific kind of flavor that you want to use within your business. So maybe you have a campaign microsite sort of template, or you have a brand template or an artist template or a departmental kind of template where you want to give a bunch of features to those creators and managers of those experiences out at the edge of your organization. But you still want them to be able to manage it the way that makes sense. So the brand in Brazil might need to present differently than the brand in the UK. You might want to have some centralization of certain things, but you want to be able to have different languages, for instance, or have different campaigns running. So it comes back to the technical bits that Augustin was talking about, where because you can push out a lot of that core capability as well as support it with kind of a common foundation, but inject the local changes, I think you have a lot of strength in terms of how you meet the demands of all of those parts of your organization, but keep them on kind of the secure and patched and compliant and all those other important kind of secondary qualities of that we as engineers and developers need to provide for our users, but give them a lot of creativity and flexibility.
Sure. Support core from top, allow or provide a space for innovation and customization specific to the region and market that an individual site might be concerned with. And then the other side of that too, that you can have innovation in a particular site that makes its way back into the contributions of the central hub of core to the subset of sites or the wider fleet, just from what was tried and tested in one of these individual sites. Yeah,
you said it a lot more concisely than I did. That's good. So
I didn't have a street metaphor, nothing like that.
No, you're totally right. That's important too, where innovation comes from the interaction with people, and whether that's you're selling a product or you're serving a constituency or whatever that is. So if you have visibility across your fleet, that's one of the other key challenges that a lot of people have, is just like knowing what in the world is going on elsewhere in the organization. So if you can see that, and you see that it's actually running well, you can take that and then incorporate that back into the core or the upstream, to put it in a Git term, and then be able to push it back down out to everybody. So you can find that innovation and basically multiply it everywhere.
Yeah, it's like the best of both worlds, where management has actually is guaranteed that there is going to be alignment with all the different regions and local places where the brand or the organization is located. And each regional player also has a lot of flexibility and lots of space to innovate and do what's specific for their market or for their regions, without any impact on actually the alignment or the strategy, the high level strategy of the organization. So we've seen actually local, because we've hosted fleets since since day one of the product life, I would say, and we've seen that a lot of sites that used to be very static, not static in the sense of a static website, but static in the sense of not a lot of updates. The only updates that we were seeing were dependency updates where you have to keep the site secured. Now we see new features being added because the upstream is always getting updated with new features, new content, and all the local sites get those updates automatically, so they can now innovate within their own space very quickly and yeah, without any constraints. So we've seen more activity on those sites compared to before. So that's been exciting. So we've seen people using source operations or different mechanisms to be very creative, even in ways that we didn't really anticipate.
Yeah, and that's important, not just because you want to drive more engagement. So by keeping something fresh and up to date, you can get more out of the investment that you've made in your site or your app. But it also matters from a technical point of view, like from an SEO perspective. Fresher and more up to date sites climb higher on Google rankings. So it's an interesting kind of add-on effect that you might look at just from a technical point of view at first, but it has interesting kind of marketing impacts downstream from it potentially.
So let's maybe take a step back into the title again. So I feel pretty comfortable with some of the challenges that happen with fleets of sites and the advantage that comes from a general perspective of why Platform is a pretty good solution for fleets, given our API allows me to, let's say, initialize any project I happen to create with an upstream piece of code of whatever application I want for a new product, for a campaign website, and now I'm managing them. So where does source operations fit into Git being our API? So what am I doing as being in charge of a fleet if I execute a source operation on websites A through Z over here that do one thing? What am I doing?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that one and be even more specific about source operations. First, why did we create source operations, and what are source operations specifically? Because if we were a hosting provider that was enforcing, let's say we host Drupal sites, or we host I don't know, some framework, and we enforce the architecture of the website to be in a certain way, we could very easily have mechanism to update those sites. Let's say we enforce you to run Drupal in a specific manner with a specific version. It's very easy for us to have mechanism to update that, because we know what's in your code base. We know how your files are structured and organized. We know what components you're running. So for us, it would be very easy to update, to have mechanism to update your site. But we are so flexible, and we allow so many different runtimes and services that we don't know what you're running. We don't know how you're organizing your services within your app. Maybe you have multiple apps within your project. You have a front end and a back end and an API. So because we don't know that, we need to give you the flexibility. Again, we're talking about flexibility, but the flexibility and the mechanism to do whatever you want with your applications. So you can be running Drupal with Composer or with Drush or with nothing, which would be a bad idea. but your source operations are mechanisms that's going to allow you to define what's the update process of a specific application that you're running. So if you're running Drupal with Composer, the basic source operation would be to run a Composer update on your website. So every time you click on a button or you run that specific API call, it's going to run that command and run the Composer update, looks for fresh dependency. But if you're running Node.js, maybe you want to use yarn or NPM. If you're using whatever else, you want to use your own package manager. Maybe you're loading the dependencies from your own place using the whatever you want to be using. So it's important to note that source operations are a very flexible mechanism to manage the content of your to manage the dependencies and the content of your site, your code base basically. So it's a very flexible way to manage your code base. And in addition to that, when you have a fleet of websites, you want to be able to have those source operations defined on all of the projects so that at the root level, you can easily update, run the operations on all the websites at once. That's basically the idea of source operations. Not sure if I answered specifically the question, but I wanted to define a little bit source operations and why we implemented that concept originally instead of just saying Composer update or Node NPM update or NPM install. That's really the customer is able to define how the update mechanism for his site work, and then we are going to run it whenever this endpoint is triggered. So that can be.
Am I oversimplifying it to say that it's almost like you're basically adding another API, like a custom API endpoint, just by kind of adding some text in a file, right? So most of what the thing that I like, because I don't like messing around with servers after doing it for really many years, is like I just like saying I want a MySQL server or a Kafka or whatever, and I just add a line to my YAML file and it just appears magically. So it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you add your magic that you want to do during that update, and you tell it how what you want to call it, and then you've basically added another API endpoint to the Platform.sh API to run that thing, right?
Exactly. That's not even a simplification. That's how it works in the background. So you call on your project your / operations, and then you have a name, and that name is basically the endpoint. So you can have 5, 6, 7, 8 different source operations within the same application. Maybe one is going to update the services, one is going to update your dependencies, one is a security update, because maybe you want the security update to go to production directly without even testing, and the less secured or less critical updates should go to a proper workflow of testing it before actually going live. That's maybe something you want to implement. So you can have multiple different operations that are going to each be available at their own endpoint, and you can trigger them regularly. Like you can define schedules for when they are going to be triggered. Maybe every day you want to check for updates, and each can be triggered in its own way. Each can create different environments the way that you want. So yeah, it's really flexible, and it's really all about adding new endpoints, basically, as you said, to your project.
Sure, and these are.
Yeah, I remember doing all this. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that because these operations, these endpoints now are defined as a part of the project itself in our configuration app YAML file. So it's a part of the code base. It's something that can be initialized both from this upstream to go on every single project. So that gives you the ability to actually execute this operation on all the projects in the fleet. But then we have, again, this opened up flexible process for innovation on these individual sites. Somebody on an individual site could come up with their own operation that then could be placed upstream and distributed across the entire fleet in the same way, because it's all very, very visible inside the code base itself.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to highlight 2 specific use cases that we covered a little bit. So not talking about security upgrades or even dependency or packages upgrades. More something like you talked about an upstream. We've had Like we have some customers that deploy SaaS-based or SaaS-like applications where they have a main application that generates different projects per customer. So when you're a customer and you go to their main site, you register, and it creates a new Platform.sh project, and all of those child projects get updated automatically using source operation from the main upstream repository. So that's one way of using source operation, for example. We also have what we call the decoupled or headless CMS, and we've seen that with Drupal more and more, where customers can have a backend project with Drupal, and that Drupal backend is going to expose the content at an API endpoint, and every front end, which can be static websites, so that it can be cached at the CDN level, for example, can update themselves automatically. So the content can be updated automatically using source operation as well. Yeah, there are a lot of different use cases that you can implement with those mechanisms.
Right, and that second example has nothing to do specifically with updating the code base. Like if I have a Gatsby front end, it could very well just be grabbing again that Drupal backend that's now updated across this whole fleet of sites. But then you will have other cases as well, I think, on our own website where you're generating individual pages based off of what you have in the backend, so that you can do sort of both things with this very similar mechanism and the same definition.
Exactly. So with static websites, most of the time you have the content of the website that's versioned in Git within the code base. So the content lives in the code base and not in a database, for example. So you can easily use source operation to manage that content that lives within your code base with source operation mechanisms. So exactly, you can generate pages on your site. You can generate translations on your site. You can load that content from a lot of, maybe a mobile app, maybe some local websites, and or anything. So that's really powerful indeed.
Yeah, and it does let you, potentially have a fairly easy mechanism for combining those two models. Like, so some of the content might be pushed down from a single source as files that get, compiled by, say, Hugo or Gatsby or whatever, and some might come from, be generated from an API, whether that's another service that you run on Platform.sh or elsewhere. So like a Drupal site or a WordPress site or a Strapi site. That then gets consumed into that and the application in the end that's serving that end user. So it allows you to mix and match those versus saying you can only have a pure JavaScript thing that's querying a live API, or you can only have a site that needs to be compiled like a Hugo site. You can mix and match those architectures pretty easily and just do whatever needs to be done from the build perspective within that source operation and trigger it externally, so you can publish it exactly when you need it to.
Yeah, exactly. And when
that command.
Exactly. And when you combine that with activity scripts, which we didn't really mention here, but they are really powerful when combined with source operation.
Yeah, I was going to try to transition to that. So we have we have projects, and within them we have these isolated environments. And big part of what we offer is that we have data that's cloned between these environments, so you can have some assurance that what you're testing on a particular branch or pull request really matches production, so that you can merge with a lot of confidence. And I can push commits to that environment, and that commit is an activity on that environment. So along with that, if I run a source operation on an environment, that is also an activity. So how do we tie this sort of context maybe between a source operation running as an activity environment to this idea of activity scripts? What do they do? Where do I put them? What can I make them do?
Good question. So that's about defining what activity scripts are. You need to look at activity scripts as webhooks, basically, that get triggered when an activity happens on platform, and you can base that depending on the status of the activity. So basically at Platform.sh, everything is activity based. When you run a cron, now you're going to get an activity. When your SSL certificate gets renewed, you're going to get a new activity. When you're deploying, you get an activity. When you're taking a backup, branching an environment, synchronizing, merging, whatever, you get a new activity in the timeline of your environment. And every time you have an activity, you can connect that activity based on its type or based on its status, for example. And you want to look, for example, all the failed activities maybe. And based on that status and this type, you can have a script that triggers and sends the information about that activity, because within that script, you catch the entire payload of the activity. You have the logs of the activity, the name of the activity, the person that triggered that activity, the timestamps. You have a lot of information about the activities itself. So you can take that information and within your script, which is a basic JavaScript file that you upload to your project, based on that activity and its status or whatever, you send that information or you connect to an external service to communicate about what happened in your project. And instead of just on our end, instead of just saying, hey, we have a Slack integration, maybe, or an email integration, or a PagerDuty integration, we give you, again, the ability to define what your integrations should be, what information should be available, when, to whom, what actions you want to take every time an activity happens, every time a script is triggered, basically. And we've seen use cases, for example, where every time a source operation runs and updates your site, because maybe the source operation is going to run and not update your site because there is no dependencies updates available, right? So maybe you run the source operation, nothing happened, your site is up to date. Maybe you run the source operation the next day and there is an update. You want to know that what update has been changed, on which environment that has been changed, and whether or not you want to merge and deploy that change to production. So you send that information to Slack or to email or even via SMS if you're a mobile phone. Someone you like who likes mobile phone and SMS, whatever. So you send that information to a channel, and then people can interact with that information and decide whether they go to production, decide whether they need to trigger an incident, decide whether they need to communicate to someone. So you can really interact with activities, and basically source operation in addition with activity script all together allow you to manage a lot of websites. And with customers that really manage hundreds, if not thousands of websites. And with those mechanisms, they only care about the sites that really are facing specific issues or have updates, and they can really go through those changes very quickly. So actually, activity scripts are very exciting as well.
I mean, we've had webhooks for a while, though, right? So that's been a feature in Platform.sh for some time. But would you say the difference is that, like, one of the challenges I've always had with webhooks is like, okay, great, you can watch an event in some system and it get a request sent somewhere else, but then you have to have something to parse that and do something with it. So what we've done with activity scripts, again, I'm going to be grossly oversimplifying things and probably wrong, so you have to correct me, but we're actually not just firing the webhook on the activity, but giving you all of the context about it and actually giving you the environment to run the response to it so that you can do the thing. You can send the message directly to Slack or to your custom crafted messaging solution or whatever. It doesn't matter. If you can write it into that JavaScript, you can actually take action on that activity, right?
Exactly. Yeah, webhook is a good comparison. Basically, activity scripts are self-hosted webhooks on steroid. You have more context. You have more information. You can debug more easily. We give you the ability to just write the script and upload it to your project. It lives with your code base. You don't need to synchronize it with a different environment. You have access to the variables of your project or your environment. So you can do way more things with activity scripts with the confidence that it's going to always run on your environment without relying on other third-party servers or services that are going to manage your webhook.
Yeah, which Which I imagine is important for some types of users that don't want to like send, say, personal information over to Zapier or another third-party WSO2 or something, in order to keep GDPR and other compliance frameworks intact.
I'm certainly visualizing the use case kind of where we've been starting from this conversation when it comes to fleets. So I have a bunch of fleets. I'm in charge in some way of initializing and can use source operations to then manage automatic updates in the background. But I have a little bit more trust in the local team that they're the ones who are going to be the best eyes on merging it. I could very well keep the power to merge it myself, but I can use an activity script to notify them, hey, there's some updates from either new code from my side or dependencies have been updated. Now it's your turn. Go check it out, do all the testing you need to make sure nothing's broken on this updated branch. And they'll get that notification because of this combination with activity scripts.
Go for it.
Well, you could go even further, right?
What's that?
I think you said
go for it. Yeah, you can implement that.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
But I think you could go even further. I mean, if you wanted to, and so notifications are interesting, but you can actually like engage other services inside of Platform.sh. So we have, I think it was sometime last year, we introduced the headless Chrome support, which is super cool because it basically lets you run a browser and do things that browsers do, like run tests or take screenshots or generate PDFs or all sorts of stuff like that in the background. So you could even say, here's a picture of what it's going to look like. Does that look, did anything bad happen? Does it look like the way you hoped it would look? To send it to people that maybe aren't necessarily in your development workflow, but are stakeholders that need to approve things. So you could actually weave the activity script triggered by the source operation. So the source operation does the update of the thing. The activity script sees it and triggers perhaps other services that exist within your Platform.sh project or your fleet of projects to generate new things out of it. So new visuals or comparisons of what it looked like before and after, or there's a lot of different things that you could do with that.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, that you're mentioning the headless Chrome. It really goes to it can really go to a very high level of automation where before running the source operation activity, you can have your activity script that trigger a screenshot of your site, right? So you take a screenshot of your environment, then the activity script the source operation is going to update your site. And at the end of the process, the activity script is triggering a new snapshot of your site, and you can compare them both directly and see if there are any changes, visible changes like an error message or something that's moving somewhere. You can decide to not merge to the production environment. You can decide to have a manual deploy. But if the two screenshots are really the same, which headless Chrome can tell you, you can decide to automatically deploy to production the changes that you've just made because the website has not been changed in any way. Or you can have performance thresholds, like headless Chrome is also able to tell you about the time that it takes to load a page. And if you define thresholds that you cannot bypass, if the site after the update is not bypassing that threshold of performance, like a number of milliseconds to load, you can decide to automatically go to production because you're not degrading the performance of your site. So the level of automation that you can actually take with those mechanisms is really, really big, really strong.
And that's really cool because it's so easy to like completely destroy your page speed score for Google inadvertently. Like it's like as putting my marketing hat on, like we put stuff on pages to see if they work better and communicate with other things and serve people better and chat with folks and all that kind of stuff. But it's really easy to accidentally just trash your performance doing that because that you don't necessarily understand the impact of every single change that you make. So being able to kind of rigorously check that score every single time, and even stop it from merging. It's like, yeah, you're supposed to be at 85, but that one was a 60. So we're going to fire an error into Slack and make sure we look at it before it goes live, because all of that matters. End user, the way that end users want to interact with your app, that people want to use fast things, but it also again affects things like your search rank, and you can kind of invisibly fail if you're not checking that all the time.
Exactly, and not only for marketing, but even engineers that are implementing new features. You can decide that every new feature that gets deployed will need to be within that threshold, and it can be completely automated. So you cannot just merge something that is going to bypass that threshold unless someone actively manually decided that it's okay for that specific feature to make your site slower. And that can be completely automated, and you can configure the way that you want.
Yeah, like you said, even detached from this idea of source operations necessarily, activity script should be useful for this, because you could very well attach the activity script to listen for a different activity of just every time a push occurs, this difference, this visual difference testing occurs every time that a push happens on any pull request, so that you are able to keep track of these changes on, say, the local team that's changing things, as opposed to just upstream changes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So I feel pretty comfortable with the idea of source ops, how they tie in with activity scripts for the managing fleets. Is there any limitations you see so far, or things that we're either excited about introducing, or are we good? We think that we solved the fleet problem so far, and we're just excited for people to go out and use it.
As a director of enterprise and fleet at Platform.sh, I would say that we've solved that fleet problem.
Okay.
However, it's not completely true. There are many things that we need to improve in terms of website maintenance or updates. Or I think we've been doing a pretty good job. I would say that the remaining piece are more on the user management or organization management, which we are working on for website updates, automation workflows, and stuff like that. I would say that we give enough flexibility for users to be really creative and go very far in the automation. I would say for activity scripts, there are some documentation that might be missing from our API documentation. I would say basically some activities are sending different payloads, so you need to be very knowledgeable about all of our activities to know when you can actually depend on a specific status or a specific activity. And it's not super clear from our existing documentation, but with playing and trial and error, I would say that you can go pretty far. But we have work to do on the documentation side to document all the different use case first, and also make sure that our activities are our payloads, depending on the activities, are sufficiently self-explanatory or sufficiently documented, so that users can very quickly rely on what we are providing, or they are going to have edge cases. They're going to find ways of not being able to rely on the right status or the right payload.
Sure, understandable. Well, that's partially my job is documentation, so I'll make sure to get into that, especially within this headless Chrome example. It's the one that I'm pretty interested in playing with and without source operations, and documenting some of these activities a little bit better. We're coming in on the last 10 minutes or so. I mean, the title is Source Operations and Fleet, and we kind of answer this in this headless Chrome example, but there's not really anything specific to fleets that source operations is I guess a fleet specific feature. Any site that's interested in managing dependencies, or even having an upstream and there not being any other sites, or pulling in content. This is something that could be enabled on any individual site without being a part of a fleet.
Exactly. However, we still tied this source operation feature with the enterprise or fleet and elite customers that we have, because we've seen the need for automation more on these types of customers, and that's where we want to really help them have a very strong SLAs and very strong fleet capabilities. Whereas on single developers on a single site or even a couple of websites, we have not seen that need for such features. So we've really tiered that feature to those types of customers as of today.
Yeah, if you do have some of the complex workflows that we've described, where you're in industries that require kind of documentation of what happens. So one of this kind of visual regression thing that we've described, with headless Chrome, is actually something I've encountered in the past working with highly regulated industries. So financial services and life sciences basically have to kind of snapshot what's happened on the website or in their marketing materials or their documentation constantly, so that they are in compliance with different regulations, with the FDA or the FTC or whatever, or the SEC in the case of like publicly traded companies. So even if they've just got one site that they're running, they often still have these needs to make sure that we know exactly what happened at different points in time. Git is great for that. So we provide part of that solution just kind of natively, because you have an audit trail, obviously, of all of the changes that happened in your website, but then coupling that with perhaps a visual representation, like we took a screenshot when that content was published. We took a screenshot when this module was updated and whatnot. So you knew exactly what was said on the website at a certain time, and you can store those securely, and even within the boundaries of your kind of compliance area or network. So within Platform.sh itself, it's also helpful if you just need to always make sure that those that your sites are up to date. They need to we need to patch the core and modules for Drupal or WordPress or whatever, and all the other dependencies that sit below those things, daily or multiple times a day, to keep a critical e-commerce site always patched and secure. So even if it's just one large application, but it's still a really useful set of capabilities.
Yep.
So maybe that's the answer to sort of how I was thinking about ending this. I mean, I'm a developer. I'm a part of this team. How do I know that I've got a fleet that I need to like really start taking seriously? That whether it's using Platform.sh or starting to take seriously managing a fleet, some kind of fleet management solution for the workload that's beginning to accumulate for these sites that I have.
In a previous life, I was a developer, and if you ever face the situation where someone is telling you that there is a critical vulnerability somewhere that you need to fix, and you're looking for the website and you need to update that website, and it's a stressful situation for you, you need to have mechanism to update it automatically. Like stress, if a vulnerability somewhere on one of your applications is a stressful situation, you're running a fleet, and you need to have mechanism to make sure that it's not becoming a stressful situation. Like deploy on Friday at Platform.sh is really something that we care for. Like today, we deployed a couple of components of our infrastructure because it doesn't have to be stressful, and it can be automated and with strong confidence and strong guarantees. So we want to offer all the mechanisms to do that. So I would say that as soon as you face that situation, you should think about putting in place those mechanisms.
The only thing I would add to that is if you're starting to spend more time maintaining all of that stuff, like maintaining the stuff to maintain, all of the scripts and infrastructure and all the things to actually maintain the actual websites in the end, then you're a good candidate for thinking about your applications or sites as a fleet, and putting in place things like source operations and activity scripts to help you with that. Like that's what I was also a developer in a previous part of my career, and 12 years ago I was like doing this sort of stuff with like Capistrano and shell scripts and all sorts of other nonsense to keep a bunch of sort of similar sites up to date, but that was consuming more and more time. So I would have loved to have this sort of capability 12 years ago.
Yeah,
but at least
although sometimes the concerns are separated within the different teams, even if it's a quite small team. You have one person that's responsible for maintenance and security upgrade and package upgrades and deployments, and one person is responsible for implementing the actual features and user-facing things. So if you're in that situation and you're actually you need to have some people that are dedicated to maintaining all that and upgrading all that, and because that's a stressful job. Maybe you need to think about automating that and having strong confidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a lot to ask to maintain the attention and still, chip away at the backlog and innovate on the sites that you have. Maintenance on top of that. It's a lot.
Yeah. The whole idea about DevOps originally, when like before that big wave, you had operations and engineering that was working against each other, because the ops wants to have everything running smoothly, and engineering wants to have new stuff all the time. So they are fighting constantly, and you don't need that basically. They can all go on the same direction and innovate and update things every time. And if you break things, you roll back. You need to have mechanisms to roll back very easily with strong confidence without downtime and stuff like that. So it shouldn't be a stressful situation.
Don't stress your fleets.
Exactly. That's a good one.
Thank you. Well, I covered all the questions or anything that I really wanted to touch today. Is there anything you guys want to close out with? We're in the last few minutes.
No? Just that we'd love to get feedback, So
yeah.
We're gonna be posting more and more of the kind of use cases and examples and recipes and sort of stuff like that. But we also want to see what other people think up and do with these capabilities. So definitely reach out to us if you're doing something cool, because we want to hear about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I'll add to that. If you go to community.platform.sh, there is an activity scripts section where you can share some of the fun things you do there. That's not a source operation specific thing, but we would love to see some of the examples that you've put together for that. And then there's another sign-off line. Thanks to Larry Garfield. Be kind to your fleet, and your fleet will be kind to you.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one too.
Augustin, Chris, thank you very, very much for joining me on this Deploy Friday. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chad.
No problem. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Join in next week where we're going to have Robert Douglas talking about Typo 3, a new book coming out about Typo 3. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time in Deploy Friday. Bye, guys.
Yeah, Deploy Friday. Bye.
Thanks.